Maya had been writing love letters to a complete stranger for 3 years, never intending to send them, never knowing his name, only that he sat at the same cafe table every morning at 8:15 reading poetry while drinking black coffee. She thought her secret obsession was harmless until the morning she accidentally left one of her letters behind and the mysterious stranger began writing back. But when Maya finally discovers the identity of her anonymous correspondent, she realizes that some love stories begin with the words we're too afraid to say out loud, and that sometimes the person who understands your heart best is someone you've never actually met. Before we dive into Maya's extraordinary journey through the written word and the unexpected romance that bloomed from her secret letters, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. Your support helps us bring you more captivating romantic drama stories every week. Now, let's discover how one forgotten letter changed everything for Maya Rodriguez and her mysterious coffee shop stranger. Maya Rodriguez had always been better with written words than spoken ones. At 27, she worked as a copy editor for a small publishing house in Boston, spending her days polishing other people's prose while her own creative writing remained locked away in journals that no one else had ever read. Maya lived alone in a studio apartment overlooking the Charles River, surrounded by towering stacks of books and manuscripts that served as both her professional tools and her escape from a world that often felt too loud and overwhelming for her introverted nature. Maya's daily routine was as precise as clockwork, a carefully orchestrated series of rituals that provided structure and comfort in her otherwise solitary life. Every morning at 7:30, she would walk to Hemingway's Corner, a small independent cafe near her apartment building that served the kind of strong coffee and fresh pastries that made early mornings bearable. Maya would order her usual medium coffee with cream and a blueberry scone, then settle into her preferred corner table with whatever manuscript she was working on that day. But Maya's morning routine held a secret that would have mortified her if anyone had discovered it. For the past 3 years, she had been quietly observing a man who came to Hemingway's Corner every morning at exactly 8:15, always sitting at the same table near the large front window, always ordering black coffee and reading poetry collections while he ate a simple breakfast of toast and jam. The man was unlike anyone Maya had ever encountered in her careful, book-centered world. He appeared to be in his early 30s, with dark hair that was slightly toused in a way that suggested he didn't spend much time worrying about his appearance. He dressed simply but elegantly, usually in worn jeans and sweaters that looked expensive but lived in. What captivated Maya most about him was the way he read poetry, completely absorbed in the words on the page, occasionally closing his eyes as if savoring a particularly beautiful line or stanza. Maya had never spoken to the mysterious poetry reader, had never even made eye contact with him, but she had become utterly fascinated by his daily presence in her morning routine. She found herself arriving at the cafe earlier and earlier, hoping to observe him for a few extra minutes, studying the way he moved through his own carefully orchestrated ritual of coffee, poetry, and quiet contemplation. What had started as idle curiosity had gradually evolved into something much more complex and troubling for Maya. She began to feel a connection to this stranger that was both inexplicable and embarrassing. She found herself wondering about his life outside the cafe, imagining conversations they might have about literature and philosophy, creating elaborate fantasies about who he was and what he might be like as a person beyond his morning coffee routine. Maya knew that her fascination with the poetry reader was becoming unhealthy, but she couldn't seem to stop herself from building an entire romantic narrative around a man she had never actually met. She told herself that her interest was purely literary, that she was drawn to him because of his obvious love of poetry. But she knew that her feelings went much deeper than intellectual admiration. The turning point in Maya's secret obsession came during a particularly lonely evening in October when she was working on a manuscript that dealt with themes of unrequited love and romantic longing. The words on the page seemed to speak directly to her own situation, and before she knew what she was doing, Maya found herself writing a letter addressed to no one in particular, pouring out her feelings about the mysterious stranger who had unknowingly become the center of her emotional world. The letter began as a simple writing exercise, a way for Maya to process her confused feelings about her attraction to someone she had never met. But as she wrote, the letter evolved into something much more personal and revealing. Maya found herself describing not just her fascination with the poetry reader, but also her loneliness, her fear of real intimacy, and her tendency to create romantic fantasies rather than pursue actual relationships. Writing the letter was cathartic for Maya, and she found herself continuing to write similar letters over the following weeks. The letters became a private journal of sorts, a way for Maya to explore her feelings about love, loneliness, and the gap between the relationships she imagined and the connections she was actually capable of forming with other people. Maya never intended to send the letters or share them with anyone. They were purely a form of personal therapy, a way for her to examine her own emotional patterns and perhaps gain some insight into why she found it so difficult to form real romantic connections. The letters remained safely locked in her desk drawer, a secret collection of thoughts and feelings that she would never have had the courage to express to another person. But Maya's careful system of private letter writing was disrupted on a gray November morning when her usual routine was thrown off by an emergency at work. Maya had received a frantic call from her boss about a manuscript crisis that required her immediate attention, and she had rushed out of her apartment with her work bag and coffee without taking the time to properly organize her belongings. At Hemingway's corner, Maya had settled into her usual table and spread out her work materials, trying to focus on the urgent editing task while keeping one eye on the poetry reader's table. She had been distracted and disorganized all morning, and when she finally packed up her things to rush back to the office, she inadvertently left behind one of her letters, mixed in with the manuscript pages she had been working on. The letter Maya left behind was one of her most personal and revealing, written during a particularly lonely evening when she had been struggling with feelings of isolation and romantic disappointment. In the letter, she had described her daily observations of the poetry reader, her attraction to his quiet intelligence and obvious sensitivity, and her wish that she had the courage to approach him and discover whether the connection she felt was real or simply a product of her overactive imagination. Maya didn't realize she had left the letter behind until she was halfway through her workday, and by then it was too late to return to the cafe before closing time. She spent the entire afternoon in a state of panic, imagining all the ways her secret could be discovered and her privacy violated. She pictured the cafe staff finding the letter and reading it aloud, or worse, somehow identifying her as the author and confronting her about her strange behavior. When Maya returned to Hemingway's corner the next morning, she was prepared to discreetly search for her missing letter and dispose of it before anyone could discover its contents. But when she approached her usual table, she found something that made her heart stop beating. An envelope with her name written in unfamiliar handwriting, placed exactly where she typically sat each morning. Maya's hands shook as she opened the envelope and found a handwritten letter that began with the words that would change her life forever. The mysterious poetry reader had found her letter, had read it, and had written back, addressing her by name and revealing that he had been equally aware of her presence in the cafe each morning. In his letter, the stranger explained that he had noticed Maya from his first day at Hemingway's Corner 3 years earlier, that he had been drawn to her obvious love of books and her quiet, thoughtful demeanor. He wrote that he had often wanted to approach her and strike up a conversation about literature, but that he had been too shy and uncertain to break the comfortable distance they had maintained for so long. The stranger's letter was beautifully written, with the kind of elegant prose and careful attention to language that Maya associated with professional writers. He admitted that he had been moved by her honest confession of loneliness and her vulnerability in describing her feelings about their daily encounters. He wrote that her letter had made him realize that the connection he thought he had been imagining was actually real and mutual. Most surprisingly, the stranger's letter revealed that he was a published poet named Daniel Ashworth, whose work Maya actually knew and admired. Daniel's poetry had been featured in several prestigious literary magazines, and Maya owned two of his published collections, though she had never connected the name with the man she had been observing at the cafe. Daniel's letter concluded with an invitation for Maya to continue their correspondence if she felt comfortable doing so, explaining that he had always believed that some of the most meaningful connections between people began with the written word rather than spoken conversation. He suggested that they could get to know each other through letters before deciding to meet in person, allowing their relationship to develop naturally and without the pressure of face-to-face interaction. Maya read Daniel's letter 3 times before she fully absorbed its contents. She was amazed that her secret observations had been mutual, that the connection she had felt with the stranger had been real and reciprocated. But she was also terrified by the prospect of actual communication with someone who had unknowingly become so important to her emotional life. After spending the entire day debating whether to respond to Daniel's letter, Maya finally decided that the opportunity for genuine connection was too valuable to pass up. That evening, she wrote a careful response that thanked Daniel for his kindness and understanding, expressed her admiration for his published poetry, and agreed to continue their correspondence. Maya's response letter was more restrained than her original confession, but it was honest about her shyness and her preference for written communication over verbal interaction. She explained that she had been drawn to Daniel's obvious love of poetry and literature, and that watching him read each morning had become one of the few genuinely pleasurable parts of her daily routine. The exchange of letters between Maya and Daniel quickly developed into the most meaningful relationship Maya had ever experienced. Daniel wrote with the same sensitivity and insight that characterized his published poetry, sharing stories about his life as a writer, his thoughts on books and art, and his own struggles with shyness and social anxiety. Through their letters, Maya learned that Daniel was a freelance poet and writing instructor who had chosen to live simply and quietly in order to focus on his creative work. He had never married, partly because his dedication to his writing left little time for conventional relationships, and partly because he had never met anyone who truly understood his need for solitude and contemplation. Daniel's letters revealed that he had been as lonely as Maya, that his daily visits to Hemingway's Corner had been motivated not just by the excellent coffee, but also by his desire to be around other people without having to engage in small talk or social performance. He wrote that watching Maya work on her manuscripts each morning had given him a sense of companionship and shared purpose that he had found nowhere else. Maya found herself looking forward to Daniel's letters with an anticipation that was both thrilling and frightening. She had never experienced such intellectual and emotional intimacy with another person, and she was amazed by how easily she could express herself in writing to someone who understood and appreciated her thoughts and feelings. Through their correspondence, Maya and Daniel explored topics that Maya had never discussed with anyone else: their fears about vulnerability and intimacy, their experiences as introverted people in an extroverted world, and their shared belief that literature and poetry could provide insights into human nature that conventional social interaction often missed. Daniel's letters helped Maya understand that her attraction to him had been based on genuine compatibility rather than mere fantasy. They shared similar values about the importance of art and literature, similar preferences for quiet contemplation over social excitement, and similar struggles with finding their place in a world that often seemed too loud and superficial for sensitive, creative people. As their correspondence continued over several months, Maya and Daniel began to share more personal details about their lives and backgrounds. Maya wrote about her childhood as the daughter of immigrants who had sacrificed everything to provide her with educational opportunities, and her guilt about pursuing a career in literature rather than something more practical and financially secure. Daniel shares stories about his own family background, his early recognition of his calling as a poet, and his decision to live modestly in order to maintain his artistic integrity rather than compromising his work for commercial success. He wrote about the loneliness that came with choosing an unconventional path and his gratitude for finding someone who understood and respected his priorities. The emotional intimacy that developed through their letters was unlike anything Maya had ever experienced. Daniel's written words revealed depths of sensitivity and intelligence that she had only guessed at during her observations of him at the cafe. And she found herself falling in love not just with Daniel as a person, but with the version of herself that emerged in her letters to him. Writing to Daniel had made Maya more articulate and confident about expressing her feelings and opinions. She discovered that she had thoughts and insights worth sharing, that her years of reading and literary study had given her a perspective that someone else could value and appreciate. But as their correspondence deepened, both Maya and Daniel began to wrestle with the question of whether they should meet in person and attempt to translate their written connection into a face-to-face relationship. They had created something beautiful and meaningful through their letters, but both of them were afraid that meeting in person might destroy the magic they had discovered through written communication. Maya was particularly anxious about the prospect of meeting Daniel in person. She worried that her real-life personality wouldn't live up to the version of herself that she had revealed in her letters, that she would prove to be too shy or awkward to maintain the intellectual and emotional connection they had established through writing. Daniel shared similar concerns, writing to Maya that he was afraid of disappointing her and destroying the beautiful relationship they had built through their correspondence. He explained that he had always been more comfortable expressing himself through writing than through spoken conversation, and that he worried about his ability to be as articulate and engaging in person as he was on paper. The turning point in their relationship came during the spring, when Maya was offered a promotion at work that would require her to relocate to the publishing house's New York office. The opportunity represented a significant advancement in her career, but it would also mean leaving Boston and ending her daily routine at Hemingway's Corner. Maya wrote to Daniel about her job opportunity and her uncertainty about whether to accept it. The promotion would advance her career and increase her salary, but it would also separate her from the city where she had built her life, and more importantly, from the daily possibility of encountering Daniel at the cafe. Daniel's response to Maya's news was immediate and heartfelt. He wrote that the prospect of losing her from his life, even in the limited way that he currently had her, had made him realize how much their correspondence meant to him and how much he wanted to explore the possibility of a real relationship with her. Daniel proposed that they meet in person before Maya made her final decision about the job offer. He suggested that they have dinner at a quiet restaurant where they could talk without the pressure of their familiar cafe environment, and where they could discover whether their written connection could translate into personal compatibility. Maya was terrified by Daniel's proposal, but she was also excited by the possibility of finally meeting the person who had become so important to her emotional and intellectual life. She agreed to dinner, and they set a date for the following weekend at a small Italian restaurant that neither of them had been to before. The week leading up to their dinner was filled with anticipation and anxiety for both Maya and Daniel. They continued to exchange letters, but their correspondence became more focused on their hopes and fears about meeting in person. Both of them acknowledged that their relationship might change dramatically once they moved from written communication to face interaction. On the evening of their dinner, Maya arrived at the restaurant early, her heart pounding with nervousness and excitement. When Daniel walked through the door, she recognized him immediately, but seeing him in a different context made her aware of details she had never noticed during her cafe observations. He was taller than she had realized, and his eyes were a deeper shade of brown than she had imagined. But what struck Maya most about seeing Daniel in person was how familiar he felt, despite the fact that they had never actually spoken before. His movements and expressions were exactly as she had remembered them, and when he smiled at her from across the restaurant, she felt the same sense of connection and recognition that had drawn her to him during those months of silent observation. Daniel approached Maya's table with obvious nervousness, but when he spoke her name for the first time, his voice was warm and familiar, exactly as she had imagined it would be during all those months of correspondence. They both admitted to being nervous, and their initial conversation was slightly awkward as they navigated the transition from written to spoken communication. But as the evening progressed, Maya and Daniel discovered that their personal chemistry was as strong as their written connection had been. Daniel was as thoughtful and articulate in person as he was in his letters, and Maya found that her anxiety gradually gave way to genuine enjoyment of his company. They talked for hours about books, poetry, their work, and their shared experiences as introverted people who had found meaningful connection through written words. Maya was amazed to discover that Daniel was even more interesting and attractive in person than she had imagined, and that her feelings for him had been based on accurate perceptions of his character and personality. Daniel, for his part, was charmed by Maya's intelligence and warmth and impressed by her insights into literature and life. He told her that meeting her in person had confirmed everything he had hoped about their compatibility, and that he felt more comfortable and natural with her than he had with anyone else in years. As their dinner came to an end, both Maya and Daniel knew that their relationship had successfully transitioned from correspondence to personal connection. Daniel told Maya that he didn't want her to make her career decision based on their relationship, but that he hoped she would consider what they might build together if she decided to stay in Boston. Maya realized that her feelings for Daniel had grown strong enough to influence her major life decisions. She told him that she needed time to think about the job offer, but that meeting him had reminded her that career advancement wasn't the only thing that mattered in building a fulfilling life. Over the following weeks, Maya and Daniel continued to see each other regularly, building on the foundation of trust and understanding they had established through their letters. They discovered that their written connection had been an accurate reflection of their personal compatibility, and that they enjoyed each other's company in all kinds of situations. Maya ultimately decided to turn down the promotion in New York and stay in Boston, choosing love and personal happiness over professional advancement. She realized that her relationship with Daniel represented the kind of deep, meaningful connection she had been searching for all her life, and that it was worth more than any career opportunity. Daniel was overjoyed by Maya's decision to stay in Boston, and he told her that her choice to prioritize their relationship had convinced him that they were meant to build a life together. He proposed to Maya 6 months later, presenting her with a ring and a handwritten poem that captured everything he loved about their unique love story. Maya and Daniel were married in a small ceremony attended by close friends and family members, with readings from their favorite poets and a reception that felt more like an intimate literary salon than a traditional wedding celebration. Their wedding vows were written as letters to each other, expressing their gratitude for the correspondence that had brought them together, and their commitment to continuing to communicate with honesty and vulnerability throughout their marriage. The love letters to a stranger had become the foundation for a marriage built on intellectual compatibility, emotional intimacy, and a shared appreciation for the power of written words to create genuine human connection. Maya and Daniel's story became a testament to the idea that sometimes the most profound relationships begin not with physical attraction or social compatibility, but with the meeting of minds and hearts through the written word. As they settled into married life, Maya and Daniel continued to write letters to each other, even though they now lived in the same house and saw each other every day. They had learned that their written correspondence was not just a substitute for face-to-face communication, but a unique form of intimacy that allowed them to express thoughts and feelings that might be difficult to share in spoken conversation. Their love story became an inspiration to other shy, literary-minded people who struggled with traditional dating and social interaction. Maya and Daniel proved that meaningful relationships could begin in unexpected ways, and that sometimes the person who understands your heart best is someone you've been afraid to approach, someone who might be waiting for you to find the courage to make the first move, even if that move is nothing more than a letter left behind by accident at a cafe table.